This Film is Lit, the podcast where we finally settle the score on one simple question. Is the book really better than the movie? I'm Brian. I have a film degree, so I watch the movie, but don't read the book.
And I'm Katie. I have an English degree, so I do things the right way and read the book before we watch the movie.
Look, some of us are lazy, alright?
If by lazy you mean wrong.
Prepare to be wowed by our expertise and charm as we dissect all of your favorite film adaptations and decide whether the silver screen or the written word did it better. So turn it up, settle in, and get ready for spoilers, because guess what? This film is lit. It's the Netflix sensation sweeping the nation. We're doing this whole episode blindfolded. It's Bird Box, and this film is lit. Hello and welcome back to This Film is Lit, the podcast where we talk about movies that are based on books. This may be the most topical episode. Well, we've done movies that are out in theaters, but this is maybe the biggest social media.
It's a big meme craze.
The biggest meme film that we've yet talked about. It's Bird Box. We have a bunch of segments. Do we have Guess Who?
We do.
All right. Well, before we get to Guess Who, we're going to do our first segment, in case you haven't seen this film, which is Let Me Sum Up.
Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
Reminder, there will be spoilers throughout. Katie, do you go first?
I think I
Yes. Go ahead and hit them with a summary of Bird Box, the book, and I will not listen.
All right. Bird Box by Josh Malerman. Mallory, a young woman who lives with her sister Shannon, has just found out that she's pregnant. At around the same time, isolated reports of people inexplicably driven to horrific violence and suicide start coming in from around the globe. As these incidents increase in number, people begin to panic. No one knows what's happening, but the prevailing theory is that these people saw something that made them violent to themselves and others. Shannon and Mallory barricade themselves inside their house, but after a few months, Shannon accidentally looks outside and commits suicide. Mallory feels she can't be alone and decides to travel to a safe house that she heard about. She makes it there and lives for some time with 5, eventually 6, housemates. It's not a great existence, but they're surviving. That changes with the arrival of a man named Gary. Gary has different ideas about the creatures that everyone says are to blame for the violent outbreaks, and he slowly creates distrust amongst the housemates. Mallory confronts him, and the housemates kick him out, but then in a moment of terror, it turns out that Gary never left at all. This main story is told alongside a second plotline that features Mallory and 2 young children rowing blindfolded down a river, trying to get to a rumored safe place. As both stories progress, it is slowly revealed how Mallory and the children came to be in this precarious situation.
Wow, that was the longest one yet.
There's a lot of, necessary information, I feel like, to understand the premise of this story. So
I'll say that was a lot.
Yeah,
that was
a
longer
long
than
one.
normal. All right, so Bird Box, the film, the Netflix original. Mallory, played by Sandra Bullock, is pregnant. Well, I'm not exactly sure how far along. Several months. 5, 6, in that range at least, if not more.
She's pretty pregnant.
Yeah, she's pretty freaking pregnant. Her sister shows up on the day they're going to go to the doctor for, one of her prenatal checkups or natal, whatever. Yeah, prenatal. I assume. I don't know. Anyways, as they're getting ready to go, they see a bunch of news reports that people all over Europe are committing suicide in the thousands, by the thousands. A fact that they are mostly nonplussed by, which we'll get into. When they arrive at the doctor, blah, blah, discussion. Sandra Bullock's not with the father of the child anymore. Doesn't really want kids. It seems like, it's not really into this, but she's still going to have this kid. They talk about potentially giving it up for adoption, blah, blah, blah. And then on the way home from the hospital, all shit hits the fan. All hell breaks loose. Her sister sees the creature So again, spoilers, kills herself, and then Sandra Bullock ends up in a house with John Malkovich and a bunch of other random cast of characters trying to figure out what's happened. Ultimately, some more people come and go. Some people get killed. Some people die. Some people don't. Eventually, it boils down to just Sandra Bullock, her new boy toy, Tom, and the 2 children she gives birth, and then she has one kid. There's another mother at one point who gives birth and then is killed. So now she has 2 kids. Ultimately, they hear a radio thing that says there. Also, a long time ago, they figured out that you see these things, these creatures. If you see them, they force you to kill yourself, so don't look at anything. That's why they're blindfolded. That's why they have all the windows blocked and everything. But they hear a radio broadcast that says, we have a compound. You just got to come down the river. Get down the river, and then once you get through the rapids, you'll get to our compound, and you can come here, and it's safe. Blah blah blah. So they're gonna go do that. Tom has to protect or ward off a band of the crazies, because some people don't kill themselves; they just become like evil evangelists for the creatures, and force other people to look at them. I don't understand that, but we'll get into that, and then. So Tom sacrifices himself. Sandra Bullock and the kids get in a boat and they make it down the river and they get to the compound. We learn a little bit about motherhood along the way, and that ends. The movie ends and they're safe.
Yep.
That's what happens. All right, let's get into Guess Who?
Who are you?
No one of consequence.
I must know.
Get used to disappointment.
Okay.
All right, we have 3 Guess Who's.
Okay.
Yeah, my Guess Who got a little complicated by stuff that the movie did, but...
Right.
Yeah, okay. So we have 3. Her black hair hangs down her shoulders. Her lips curl down in a curious frown. Her blue eyes look gray in the pale light of the bathroom.
I mean, it sounds like Sandra Bullock with that frown face. She has a distinct frowny face, a very often sort of resting frown face. So I'm going to go with Mallory.
It is Mallory.
Nailed it. She has dark hair and she has a frowny face. I'd say they nailed that.
Yeah, not bad. Not bad.
I don't know how old she's supposed to be in the book, but we'll get there, maybe.
Younger.
Yeah, younger. Not 54.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He has blondish brown hair. His features are strong. His blue eyes flare with intelligence. Unshaven, his stubble is almost red.
I'm going to guess that this is probably Tom, and he's a ginger in the book, and he's a black guy in the movie. Because I'm trying to think of other important male characters. It could be John Malkovich's character. But the intelligence behind I'm going to guess Tom.
It is Tom.
Yep. Nailed it.
He's also a middle school teacher in the book.
That's not
a
mentioned.
construction worker.
Oh, yeah, he was a construction worker in the film. That's right. Yeah, they did change that.
I guess they decided that was sexier. Construction worker.
Yeah, well, and then he gets to tell his story about...
Yeah.
Although it would have been more horrifying if, like, all the fucking middle school kids started
right?
killing themselves and he was recounting that tale. But...
She sees a man much older than herself, with a brown beard and a tweed blazer over a black sweater. His brown hair, combed over to the side, is unruly. He is both older and heavier set than any of the others.
Than any of the others. Well, this does kind of sound also like the guy at the end. When they get to the compound, I think he was wearing a tweed jacket, and he was heavier set and older. But my other thought would be John Malkovich's character, because he's like a main character. But he doesn't wear a tweed jacket. He's like a... I'm going to go with John Malkovich, his character.
Whose name was Douglas.
Is that it?
Yes.
Okay.
But that's not who it is.
Oh.
It's Gary.
Oh, it's Gary. I actually thought about Gary too, but the way she said... The only reason I went away from Gary was that when you said he was like heavier than the others, to me that implies she's seeing this person along with, like, I thought this was like something about that description made me think that this was when she first got into the house, and there was like she's kind of surveying everybody.
Nope.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He's heavier than the others. It's like, well, Unless in the book, maybe Gary shows up with other people. It's not just Gary or something.
No, it's just Gary.
Okay, well, that description's weird to me then. It seems weird to compare him to the rest of the people in the house. I don't know. Anyways. All right, 2 for 3, not too bad. Now it's time for Was That in the Book?
Nicholas Flamel is the only known maker of the Philosopher's Stone.
The what?
Honestly, don't you two read?
Katie, I got a lot of questions.
I know you do.
Even in Lost in Adaptation, I have a lot, which we'll get to after this. Some of this might veer into slightly Lost in Adaptation territory on some of these questions. But this section's very obvious. I just asked Katie about things from the film to see if they were in the book. In the book, are the kids just referred to as boy and girl?
Yes, they are.
If so, why? Now, I will expand upon this, that I thematically understand why, ultimately, I understand why Sandra Bullock refers to them as boy and girl, because, sort of desire to not get attached to them and her little reluctance and the motherhood thing, and just if not naming them. I get that, and I assume that's basically
it's similar in the book. There's never, an explanation for why she calls them that, but that's definitely the vibe that I got.
Yeah.
Similar to how, people tell you not to name stray cats or whatever, because you'll get attached to them.
Because then you get more attached.
Yeah.
And in this sort of apocalyptic scenario, he sees it better off to not do that. And ultimately decides to at the end, does name them. Okay, is the book out of order, or not out of order? So the movie jumps back and forth between when the outbreak first happens and sort of current time when they're making the trip down the river. We start on the trip down the river, and then we jump back 5 years before when the sort of apocalypse started. And we could go back and forth between them, basically. Is that how this book is structured?
Yes, the book is told similarly in a non-linear fashion.
Cool. I thought it was effective, actually. And I will say overall, this movie has gotten really mixed reviews. I thought it was okay. It's not a great film, but it was okay. It had things that didn't work, and we'll talk about them. But I thought overall, I was like, it's fine. See, whatever.
I had my issues with it.
I did too. Like I said, we'll get into them. But I didn't hate it or anything. I didn't think it was bad. I just thought there were definitely issues. Like I said. So in the book, this struck me in the film when we meet Sandra Bullock, when we jump back 5 years, or during the start of the sort of outbreak of the suicide thing. Sandra Bullock, her sister shows up with groceries for her because she's a painter. And, she just is a recluse. She just sits and paints all day and doesn't, take care of herself or whatever, or pay attention to the world. Her sister's like, by the way, have you heard the news? And they turn on the news, and it's stories on every channel about tens of thousands of people committing suicide. And their reaction in the movie is just at least it's in Europe. Click, turn it off. And then they just go about their normal day. And I thought that was the weirdest thing. Is that sort of how they treat it in the book?
Okay. So...
Or maybe there's not that scene in the book. I don't know, but...
In the book, this progresses a lot more slowly.
More slow. Yeah, slow.
It's not like news reports of thousands of people killing themselves at once, which I feel like it might be partly where the comparisons to The Happening are coming in. But it doesn't happen like that in the book. It's more isolated reports of one or two people doing this, but then they start to come in faster and faster. Yeah. And spread across, because at first it's in Russia.
Right, and that's what they say in the movie,
it's not here, it's not happening here. It kind of reminded me, actually, do you remember a few years ago when there were a few isolated reports of people doing bath salts?
Oh, yeah,
and eating
Florida
people's faces off? Yeah. That was kind of a similar vibe that I got to it, where it was just a handful of reports, but then it starts happening more and more and spreading to different places.
Okay. It was just in the movie, it particularly struck me, the idea that you would turn on the news and see a report about tens of thousands of people in Europe killing themselves, and then just turning it off and moving on and having a chill, normal. It's very strange.
Very strange.
I'm what is wrong with you people? I would be what the hell is going on? Even if it's not here, I would still be okay, I gotta know more about this. What the heck is this? No,
in the book, it definitely at least at first, it seems like much easier to blow off as like, this has only happened a couple of times. We don't actually know what's causing it. It's not happening here, so I'm not going to worry about it.
Yeah. Okay. And I actually don't have this in the here, but you'll be able to answer it. So after they go to the hospital for her checkup, and then on the way home is when sort of the stuff starts going crazy in America, and her sister sees the thing and drives a car into another car and crashes, and then walks in front of a trash truck. Does her sister kill herself in the book?
She does, but that is not how it happens.
Okay. It's how does it happen? Is there sort of that sort of chaotic, like everything all hell breaking loose moment in the book? No.
The book starts and they're going to get a pregnancy test.
Oh, okay.
Because she's just like realized that she missed a period.
Okay.
And they see people like starting to cover their windows and like try to walk around covering their eyes, and they're kind of like, what are people even worried about?
Yeah.
Because this isn't really happening. Like, why are people freaking out about this?
Yeah.
And then it kind of progresses to a point and they end up like barricading themselves inside their house. And then her sister, who in the book is named Shannon, accidentally sees outside and then commits suicide.
Gotcha.
Like upstairs.
Okay. All right. Well, there you go. That's completely different.
Yep.
Does a woman crawl into a burning car? That scene was horrifying.
That is not in the book.
Well, it was an effective movie scene. Holy shit. John Malkovich's wife crawls into a burning car, and I was like, well, that's awful. That's awful. So that's not from the book. Is Sandra Bullock a secret badass? There's a moment in the movie where she points the shotgun. It's when the pregnant woman comes in, I think, or whatever. Mm-hmm. And John Malkovich is like, hey, you don't even know how to use that thing. And then she like does a thing where she like holds the ejector or whatever and ejects all the shells because we eventually find out she grew up like on a farm or something.
Yeah, on like a ranch or something
like that. Is she a secret badass in the book? Does she have sweet gun skills?
She becomes pretty badass.
Right, over the course of
surviving. For 5 years, but not at the beginning, no.
Okay, she doesn't have sweet gun skills. They just added that moment in. All right. Does B.D. Wong tie himself to a chair to try to see the things on the security cameras? I guess, did she ultimately end up in the house with these same general people in the book that she does in the movie?
Yes.
Okay.
It's also different. Okay, so in the movie, they are out and she ends up in the house because she needs to get out of the fray.
Yeah, like everything's going wild.
Yeah, in the book, she goes there on purpose because she heard it was like a safe house. A safe house.
Gotcha.
And B.D. Wong's character,
who owns the house,
a version of that scene where he ties himself to the chair does happen in the book, but it happens before Mallory arrives at the house, so she hears about it secondhand.
He tried to look at him on the security camera.
Yeah, and he was like almost like a doomsday type prepper. So he has like,
that's not what we get in the movie.
He has like the giant cellar with all of like the food
stuff. Gotcha.
Which is why they were putting it out there as like, oh, this is a safe place you can come to.
Gotcha. Yeah, in the movie she just ends up there because she's running down the street while everything's going wild, and the house is just there, and they're like try to get her inside because she's a pregnant woman, I guess.
Also, that's a very nice house on a pretty busy street.
It is. It's on a very busy, it's a pretty big thoroughfare that it's on. But I also thought it was interesting that, like, I was like, there's such a random amount of, and I guess it makes sense that, like, there's so many people out on the street running around, and like 10 of them go into this house.
Yeah.
And like the rest of them, I guess, we're just trying to get home or something. I don't,
And such a colorful cast of characters.
It seems like such a weird random, like it makes more sense in the book that like somehow they hear about it, or, people would show up there because, this guy's like got food and stuff and is like it's like a small fortress or whatever. But anyways, does Bargain Bin Spike bang the yoga instructor? I don't know if she's a yoga instructor. She's bending over at one point.
I thought she was like a
she was
cop.
Yeah, she's a cop.
She was in the academy.
She's in the academy. Yeah, I don't know. Well, she was like doing. She wasn't doing yoga. She was just stretching at one point. So I just called her the yoga
How
instructor.
dare you?
I forgot that she absolutely was in the police academy. And she's like, we're never having sex. Next scene, having sex.
Okay, so
matter.
neither of those characters are in the book per se.
Okay.
They do say at one point that Bargain Bin Spike's name was Felix, and there is a character named Felix.
Okay.
But he's not the same character.
Okay.
Like, when they first got into the house, I don't know if you heard me typing furiously, because I was typing, who are all these people?
Yeah, you were typing a lot throughout.
Yeah.
Because apparently they changed quite a bit.
They did.
Okay. I didn't put this one in here, but I want to know the answer to this. Is the Charlie character in the book? Is there a guy who's writing a novel, a post-apocalypse novel, and is doing research?
No.
By going out on supply runs?
No, but I kind of enjoyed that the movie threw shade at the Hunger Games and like the Maze Runner series.
Yeah, he did.
I thought that was
trash.
funny.
Yeah, those. I thought it was interesting though. I thought it was a funny little, so weird. They're like getting ready. They need to go make a supply run because they're out of food, and like Sandra Bullock's gonna go, and John Malkovich and Tom and somebody else, and then they're like, Charlie, you need to come because he worked at the grocery store they're gonna go to. He has the keys and stuff. And they want him there so that if they, need help finding whatever.
Well, it makes sense for him to go.
Right, it makes sense for him to go, but he doesn't want to go. But the way she convinces him is by saying, it's research for your book. I was like, what?
He's like, yeah, all right.
Oh, okay. Like, what?
I don't know. There were things that I liked about that scene, but I was also kind of like, you really should not let Sandra Bullock go.
No.
She is heavily pregnant.
Wildly pregnant, yeah.
She is a liability.
Yeah, that seems like a terrible idea, but sure. Speaking of, okay, two things. Oh boy, all right. So this is a weird thing. So this happens in the modern, when they're going down the river is when this occurs. They're going down the river and there's this guy starts yelling at him, at her and the two kids in the boat, saying like, oh, take your blindfold off. It's safe. I got food or something, and then he comes up to the boat and grabs her and tries to take her blindfold off. And she ends up macheting him. And it turns out he has seen the creatures, but he has not killed himself. And this is the first time we're introduced to this idea in the movie, is that he didn't kill himself. He's now like an evangelist for the monster creature, whatever the things that make you kill yourself when you see them. Some people that doesn't happen, they become, like evangelists trying to get other people to see the things. Does that happen in the book? So
there is a similar scene with the guy in the river.
Okay.
Where he tries to get them to take off their blindfolds.
Right.
The difference, and I think this is an important difference here, is that in the movie, Mallory, like you said, she machetes him to death.
Yeah.
In the book, they get past him, and then he like almost immediately kills himself. So to me, the implication there was that he was very far gone. Because like there is mention in the book that some people like kill themselves right away.
Yeah.
And other people, like, it takes a while for it to like take hold of them.
Yeah.
So I don't know. To me, there was like kind of a different implication in it having him kill himself right after that.
Yeah, maybe. I guess my other question then extending from there is because we see more of these people later. Does that scene happen like with Tom and like there's like a band of them that like...
No. And I want to talk about that later.
So in the book, is this the only time we see, I guess Gary, which we'll talk about, which I also have questions about, and we'll get there. But, okay, so there are, though, in the book, characters that have seen the thing, and then, but don't immediately kill themselves, but do, like, try to get other people to... You see what I'm saying? Does that happen?
Yeah.
Like, I guess we'll talk about it more with Gary, but like, because that's what happens with Gary.
Yeah, and
in the movie.
Gary in the book is played as more of like a wild conspiracy theorist.
Okay. All right. I don't. Okay. So, do they make a supply run where they drive blind with the GPS?
No.
That was interesting. Yeah. That would never have worked. There was too much shit, and now they played off in the movie. It's a little helpful that they're in like a super deluxe car that has like collision detection. Mm-hmm. So like, the random cars and shit in the middle of the street, they can kind of drive around, it's still, I find it incredibly hard to believe they made it to a mile and a half or whatever with, you know, without just getting stuck.
I mean,
it seems
in the
like
book,
you would
they
just get
just
stuck.
drive blind at a couple
That's
points.
even more ridiculous, honestly. The movie makes more sense. Especially within the movie, the like I said, the nature of the sort of apocalypse when it happens, like with all the fucking crashed cars everywhere and just like stuff everywhere, it would be impossible to drive down the street. There's just like cars abandoned all over the place. Like you would just run into stuff constantly. But the movie kind of makes it seem plausible. Okay, so when they finally get to the store, which I don't even know if they make any supply runs in the book at all to where this would even be from the book. Basically,
there are 2 points where a couple of characters venture out.
Okay, so anyways, in the movie, they go to the grocery store to get supplies because they're out of food because they have like 10 people or whatever. And they get there and they're like, okay, oh, this is great. We're here. We can get all the stuff we need. And John Malkovich, this character, just goes, fuck that. Where's the booze? And I want to know if that line, if anything like that, is from the book or something. I don't even know.
It's not in the book.
Okay. I just like his. I was like, I want that line to be in the book, and I was like, you know what, scratch that. I want to think that John Malkovich just made that line up on the spot.
Maybe he did.
That would be great. Like, fuck that. Book. Where's the booze? It was really interesting. So his character seems to be like maybe an alcoholic in the movie, because we see him several times, just like maybe just not even alcoholic, whatever. But they go out of their way to show him like having his own stash of booze and that sort of thing. Like, and one of the times is really weird. And I don't know if this is a John Malkovich thing or what this character decision was. He has like a little like, mini bar, like the little plastic bottles, and he pulls it out and he puts it on his tongue like he's like blotting acid or something. He does like, he doesn't drink any. He like puts it on his tongue, tips it up so that it like hits his tongue and then tips it back down. So he gets like literally like almost none.
He just gets a taste, which I agree would be the weirdest way to drink straight liquor.
Yeah.
Because I feel like the idea is that you can't taste it when you like take a shot. You want to be able to not taste it.
And now that's why I think that scene is implying that he's like an alcoholic, is that he's but even I don't know. I thought that scene was so weird, and it didn't ever go anywhere other than he just drinks more later in the movie. Like when they get to the grocery store, he's just already actively drunk in the grocery store. I was like, well, that's a terrible idea because now you have to get back to the fucking house. They just kind of gloss over all that. But all right, no, so because that line made me laugh, so it's not in the book. That's unfortunate or fortunate, whichever way. Does she find this is interesting in the movie? They get to that grocery store, and this is where Sandra Bullock, Mallory, finds birds in the grocery store. One, I assume the birds are in the book, hence because of the title. Bird box, yes. So I would assume she has birds.
Yes, there are birds in the book.
Does she get them at a grocery store?
No.
Where does she get them?
At one point, two of the characters go out like scavenging through the neighborhood, and they're actually looking for dogs because they have this idea that like, oh, maybe dogs aren't affected, and we can like kind of train them as like seeing eye dogs. Yeah. And they find some birds in somebody's house. In somebody's house. And they bring them back and they use them similarly as like an alarm system. Yeah. Because the birds freak out whenever anybody gets close to the house.
Yeah. Or, well, anybody. What do you mean anybody?
Any entity.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I was like, you mean like the things or whatever, the creatures, which we'll discuss what the rules.
I want to discuss those.
I got a whole section about it. We're going to get to that. But I thought it was really interesting in the movie. So they're in like a pretty big town. It seems like they're in the suburbs. They say because like somebody comes from Gary came from the city or whatever. But they're in like the suburbs. But it's like a pretty I mean, when the apocalypse happens, there's like people everywhere. Yes. It's like a populated area. And for some reason, the grocery store either sells or has birds. I thought that was very strange. Like a pet section. Chief. Like,
but it's just the one cage of birds at the front. It's the one
cage of like 3 birds. But it's in like a section. It's like behind the counter. It seems like she like looks over the counter, and so maybe it's just the store has pet birds, which is I don't know if that's weirder or if it's weirder that this grocery store sells
seems
birds.
Unsanitary.
Because like I would get it if they were like in a little town where there's like a store and that store has everything. You know, it's like a Walmart where it's like groceries and you can get pets there and you know they have like all kinds of stuff. because that's how, you know, like little towns kind of that.
Right.
But this is why would it? Anyways, I thought that was a very strange place to find.
Yeah, no, it's weird.
And not in the book. They just find them in somebody's house, which makes sense. But they don't really spend much time going to other people's houses in this one. Eventually, they do later. But okay, this I need to explain this to me because this was really confusing and really infuriating watching the movie. In the movie, anytime, so whenever they go outside, they put blindfolds on, or you know, they cover all the windows and everything. But anytime they venture out, and then when they get inside somewhere, they just immediately take their blindfolds off.
Yeah,
and are like, we're good. So in the movie, it seems to be implied that for some reason the people like know or assume that whatever these things, these creatures, the whatever that make people, that when you see them make you kill yourself, don't go inside. Does this happen in the book?
This is not how it plays out in the book, and I want to talk about this more in a different segment.
Okay.
But the rules of the movie don't make sense.
I was very confused by the rules of the movie. And I have more questions about it. So yeah, that was the thing that was really confusing to me, is that like any time in the movie that they, as soon as they get inside, they're just like, whoop, blindfolds off. Even in places where like, I get it if it's like your house and you assume that nothing could have gotten inside or whatever. But like there's a point later where Tom gets into a house and he takes his blindfold off and he's like shutting windows and stuff. I'm like, couldn't these things be in the house?
Or right at the window?
Or
I don't
like why would you immediately take your blindfold off when you're inside? I would not assume that these things can't go indoors. Like it's so weird to me watching the movie. Like anytime they get inside, they're just like, well, I'm inside, it's safe, it's home, it's you know, like when you're playing tag as a kid and you like touching the tree. It's
you're on base.
Yeah,
and
you're on base.
They
can't get you. I'm like, what?
I don't know. I had a lot of issue with the way that the movie kind of tried to like create rules.
Yeah, we'll talk about it. Like I said, I have more questions. I have more questions about that. That I was just very confused. Okay, following on to that, do these monsters make leaves float?
No.
Okay, because this was another big problem I had with the rules of this movie, is that one, the like you see whenever the things are around, and they're kind of giving you some implication of, so us as an audience member realizes that there's something there, like the leaves start kind of flying, or like the little girl's hair stands up at one point. So somehow these entities are like, you know, either create wind or like anti-gravity or electricity or whatever. But the thing that's really interesting to me, and this was what made the movie the most ineffective to me, is that so many times, and this is where the rules got really confusing, is that as far as we know, these things, these entities, don't physically interact with the world. Mm-hmm. But so like our characters seemed like the rules they set up in the beginning is if you see them, you kill yourself. We don't have any other sort of setup of like, or if they get to you, they can eat you. Mm-hmm. But so many times in the latter half of this movie, Sandra Bullock, when she thinks the things are around, starts freaking out and running and like shooting. And I'm like, what is that going to do? One, do you need to run away from them if you can't see them? Why would you need to run away?
I don't know, because they seem like they're like in the ether.
Yeah. Well, and my question is, they can't take your blindfold off that we know. You know, like, it's so weird to me that she like runs away from these things. When it's like, why do you need to run away? There's no indication in the movie that these things do anything other than if you see them, you kill yourself. So, like, running from them makes no sense to me.
Yeah.
Because you can't see. She has a blindfold on. Like, if it's right next to you, it doesn't. I mean, I get maybe you'd be scared if you think it's that, like, whatever. But, like, as far as we know, these things don't attack you. They don't, you know what I mean? Like,
I get maybe trying to have some kind of an implication of like a fight or flight response.
Right.
But yeah, there's no implication of that. And there's not really in the book either. There are a couple moments where characters think that they feel something touch them.
Right.
But, of course, they're blindfolded, so we don't know what's going on.
Well, it was just so strange. And, like, she pulls out guns and is shooting at the wind, and it's just like, I don't know. I just didn't get what the rules of these creatures were. And so, like, when she's running away from them, like I said, I get if you're scared or whatever, but, like, at this point, it's 5 years into it. I feel like she would have enough experience and know, like, okay, I can just walk away from these things. Like, if I can't see them, they're not going to eat me. They're not, you know what I mean? They're not, you would know by that point, I would think, you know, how these things work if it's been 5 years.
Or you would, at least I would think, have some better idea.
Well, and they clearly don't seem to seek out people because you've been surviving inside. They know you're there. You've been going around outside, gathering supplies. They're prevalent enough. These things, these entities are around enough in the world that you need to constantly wear a blindfold so you don't see them, which means that every time you go out for a supply run or whatever, these things are seeing you if they see or whatever. But they're not like, in this whole 5 years, they haven't like tried to get into your house. Mm-hmm. Like when you open the door to go outside, they don't come rushing in or whatever. So like, why would you then think that like when you're outside, they're gonna like get you? I just didn't understand why the character would assume they need to run away from these things. It was very strange to me. I don't know. And that was what like didn't made the movie not work for me at towards the end, like with what was the whole thing where they're going down the river and then like she goes to get supplies and is like running from them and tripping over stuff. And I'm just like shooting her. I'm like, why? I'm rambling on about it. It's just, I didn't get it.
That's because it doesn't make any sense.
Okay. Moving on to Gary. I don't even know if we're going to get an answer for this. Gary, so like when we see the guy in the river who tries to like get her to take her blindfold off, he's like very clearly like infected or whatever, and he's like crazy. He kind of like tries to play it off at first, like when he's yelling at them from across the river or whatever. But once he gets up to her, he's like full on psycho mode. But Gary is like hiding it in the movie. So Gary gets inside and he seems fine. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden he like switches and like he pulls out all these drawings of the creatures or whatever, I assume. And now we see his eyes and he's infected or whatever. But like he could hide it for a while. Well, does that happen in the book?
Yes, sort of. It's so hard to try and explain this because part of what makes the book effective as a horror story is the fucking ambiguity. Yeah. It's the fact that they don't know what the rules are, so therefore you, the reader, don't know what the rules are. Okay. And the movie, where the movie stumbles is by trying to add rules.
Yeah, I feel like
but they don't know how.
Yeah, see, I think that's the thing. The movie tries to add these rules because they felt like we needed it as viewers, which is often true. You often want to know what the rule in a horror movie. You want to know the rules of why you like when people die or when bad things happen. You want to know what the rules are and how people broke the rules, and you know what I mean. Like that's kind of how horror movies effective. Like in Nightmare on Elm Street, the rules are you don't fall asleep. If you fall asleep and you're in the dream world, you can be killed by Freddy. So those are the rules. Like in the dream world, you can be killed by Freddy. If you're awake, you can't. Very simple rules. We get it, cut and dry. And in this, I felt like they tried to do the same thing, but then it got real muddy. Yes. With Gary, I was like, okay, so he was like hiding the fact that he's somehow infected, and then, I'm saying infected. That's not really the right word, but like kind of. Yeah. And then it like just turns on in his brain all of a sudden, and then he starts killing everybody. Well, not killing, but ripping all the stuff off and making people look at the creatures and stuff. I don't know. I don't even know what my question is. So in the book, you're saying that Gary, it's never clear that Gary is infected necessarily, so much as
Gary claims to have seen the creatures. Okay. But there's also no like visual cue with their eyes in the book. Yeah. So like we don't know if he has actually seen the creatures or if he's just this like conspiracy theorist because Gary's whole line in the book is that, oh, you're only going to go mad if you think you'll go mad. Right. Or whatever. Yeah. And like I said, there is some like discussion in the book of like, oh, it seems like some people can like hold out longer before they start committing violent acts. Right. But we don't know why that is, and we don't really know what the reason for it is.
interesting.
So like it's just really hard to
yeah.
kind of like suss out what exactly the movie's trying to do here, because they tried to add rules, but the rules are muddy and they don't work and they're not consistent.
Yeah.
So it's hard for me to parse.
Right. Like when I'm asking, like, well, did Gary get infected? Well, can Gary hide that he's infected? You're like, well, in the book, he's not really infected, or is he? But it's more and more muddy. But he might be, but you don't know. But ultimately, Gary does do basically the same thing in the book that he does in the movie.
He tears down all of the window coverings and
Does he stab people? John Malkovich in the chest with scissors?
No.
Okay.
Well, we don't really know what exactly goes down because we're with Mallory upstairs.
Gotcha.
And she is in labor.
Yeah.
So the movie got that right.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Okay. Does Tom sacrifice himself to save Sandra and the kids?
Tom does not survive Gary in the book.
Okay. Because in the movie, and that's what I thought was going to happen in the movie, is it looks like he's about to get shot by Gary. But he ends up surviving, and then they spend 5 years together, 4 years together, raising these kids, which I thought that's an interesting change. We'll talk about it later when you get to the other segments, I guess. But so in the movie, he sacrifices himself basically when this group of infected, people show up in these cars to like find anybody who hasn't seen the creature.
Yeah, and I want to talk more about that later because that whole thing I thought was super problematic. And
all right, well, I will talk. Okay, so Tom doesn't survive Gary, so he does not sacrifice himself to save Sandra and the kids.
No.
Well, okay. So my next question here. Let's first preface this by saying, is in the book. So there is the boy and the girl. Is the boy Sandra Bullock's Mallory's kid? And then is the girl the daughter of another character?
Yes.
And that that Mallory's taken care of?
Yes.
That is the same?
Yes.
Okay. So in the movie, when they're going down the river, they get to the rapids, and the whole thing she's been saying is that, we're going to get to the rapids. One of us is going to have to look so that we can steer through the rapids and not crash and drown, basically. So she goes, one of us will have to look, and the boy keeps saying he'll do it. And she goes, no, I'll tell you who's going to do it when we get there. And there's this weird thing going on. And now, so this whole moment is sort of like, Sandra Bullock was already a reluctant mother to begin with. Mm-hmm. She didn't really want to have a kid. And then now she's the mother of two children, one of which is not her biological child. And the implication in the movie is that she's going to basically tell the girl to do it so that she doesn't lose her kid, but the girl... But in the movie, it's this weird thing where this, like, 4-year-old girl is, like, aware of what's going on here.
Yeah.
You got this, right? In the movie, every time the boy's like, I'll look... And then Sandra Bullock's like, no, I'll tell you when we get there. The little girl gets this look on her face like, oh, she's gonna kill me. And I'm like, is the girl, I guess, does any of this happen in the book? And if so, is this 4-year-old girl like incredibly aware of, and have like the emotional maturity of somebody like 4 times her age to like understand the weird nuance of like the fact that Sandra Bullock's character doesn't love her as much as this other kid potentially, and she thinks she's gonna sacrifice her, and so she's like gets weird and furtive. Is that
no?
Okay.
Okay. I had a problem with this too because, well, it's not rapids in the book.
Yeah.
The premise in the book is that the river is going to break off into like different channels.
Right, and they gotta go.
So one of them is going to have to take a peek.
So they go in the right one.
Yeah, so they go into the right channel. But there's never any question that anyone but Mallory is going to do it.
Okay. That's what I thought was going to happen in the movie. It's not what happens.
No.
None of them look. They just crash and end up surviving the rapids anyways. Like the boat flips over, but they all survive. I thought this whole setup was going to be the little girl keeps thinking, she's like, no, I'll tell you who's going to do it. And the little girl the whole time thinks she's going to have her do it. But ultimately, Mallory is going to be the one that looks, oh, get it? She learned something about motherhood or something. Whatever. I don't know. I thought that was what was going to happen in the movie. It's not what happened. So I was like, well, all right. But is that... So she looks in the book?
Yes.
And does... We'll get there, I guess. I don't want to spoil what happens necessarily. But, okay. So that's really different. My point being is that I was very confused by, like, I thought it was very strange that this little girl and the way this actress plays it is so, she has the most knowing look for like a 3 or 4, however old this little girl's supposed to be. She's like giving these looks of like, it made me uncomfortable. I was like, little kids aren't supposed to like get things like. I
mean, I'll raise you that they have grown up in the apocalypse.
Right. I don't know. I just thought it was very strange how the way this little girl plays it felt. I was so off put by it. And like I was like, is this little girl going to end up being, I like thought there was going to be some weird twist because of the way this little girl plays this character, that she's like a super secret genius, or that she was infected the whole time and hiding it. I didn't know what was going on. She, like, these little looks she gives, and it was very confusing.
Oh my God.
I thought that whole thing with her and the way that little girl plays, like, being suspicious of Sandra Bullock, I just found so strange, and it doesn't really ever go anywhere. I mean, it does in the sense that ultimately she realizes that Sandra Bullock does care about her and, you know, names her, blah, 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 all that, whatever. That's how the book ends, or the movie ends. But anyways. Finally, when they get to the forest after they get out of the boat, and this is a thing, and now probably not in the book. In the movie, like, the creatures now can apparently, like, whisper into your head, because they're in the woods wandering around trying to find the birds at this compound. And they keep hearing the voices of the dead people, like Tom. She's like, Sandra Bullock is like hearing Tom saying like, oh, come talk, you know, come take your blindfold off, come to me.
Okay,
and then
so
they're running around in the woods.
That's not in the book.
Okay.
And I want to talk more about that later, because I had also had an issue with that.
Okay. Boy, this is a really different, lots of different stuff here. Okay, I guess I should preface this question with, do they arrive at a sanctuary compound at the end of the book?
Yes.
Okay. Is her doctor there?
She never has a doctor in the book.
Okay.
So
that was a weird...
They do claim to have medical professionals there. We
Right.
never actually see them, but we don't really have any reason to think they don't.
Okay. I just thought it was very interesting and like a weird... I don't know, where they arrive at the compound at the end of the movie, and they stroll in, and then her doctor, her prenatal, you know.
Yeah, her fucking doctor's there.
Her doctor's there, and she's like, oh, Dr. Lapham. And I'm like, oh, all right. Sure. How did she get there? Why all right, sure, fine.
Why fucking not, I guess.
And then following up on that, is the compound that they arrive at a school for the blind?
Yes, it is.
And that's kind of why these people are safe,
yes.
or have been safe, is that most of them are blind.
Yeah.
So they can't see. Okay. And last thing, does the school for the blind have a fucking aviary?
No.
What was that?
At least they don't make mention of it.
They get into this school for the blind, and they're in the courtyard, and it has an enclosed. It's like an aviary. It's got a giant like metal, you know, like plants and stuff and ivy have grown over all this like a big enclosure that all the birds are in, and they have like a giant aviary. Then they don't.
No.
Well, I was like, why would a school for the blind have a giant aviary?
Also, why are they not just getting shat on all the time?
Also, why is
by
the school for
birds?
the blind in the middle of the woods?
That's a good question.
I was very confused by the fact that there's a school for the blind in the like remote wilderness in California or wherever they are.
It's been a few years, so a lot of stuff is overgrown.
Right. So maybe it's not quite as remote as it seems to be.
Yes, it seems like. It's by the river in the book, because they don't ever have to like wander through the woods.
Yeah.
The people who are running this compound now have built like a fence by the river, so that they would like their boat would get caught in it, and they could just come down and like fetch them, basically. Right. So they don't ever have to like follow the sounds of the birds.
Right.
Although there is a scene with birds that was left out of the movie that I'm going to talk about.
All right.
If we ever get there.
Well, I'm done with was that in the book now. So this whole section could have been lost in adaptation, but let's get into the actual lost in adaptation section, which already has a bunch of questions in it that you probably won't be able to explain. So let's do it.
Just show me the way to get out of here, and I'll be on my way.
Wow, there's a lost.
Yes, and I want to get unlost as soon as possible.
All right. First things first. Is there a reason that Mallory didn't get an abortion?
Nothing explicit. In the book, she just wants to keep the baby.
Okay, because in the movie, it feels very much like she's somebody who would have gotten an abortion. She seems not to want this kid. She seems completely... When we arrive, it's far enough along where she no longer could.
Right.
But, like, so in the movie, that's kind of how they gloss over that. They just don't ever address it. But, like, to me... I was like, the whole time, like, she seems to want nothing to do with this kid, or with having a kid.
Yeah.
She seems to want, the man that she got pregnant with is out of the picture. He left or whatever, or they're not together. So he doesn't seem to care. And I'm like, I was just like, why didn't she get an abortion? And again, I understand why now she's not, because like I said, she's like 8 months pregnant or whatever. But I don't know. I just, so she just in the book, she does actually want.
She wants to keep the baby. And regardless, the situation kind of quickly elevates to the point that she couldn't safely get a medical abortion.
Right.
So
yeah, because in the movie, there's no indication that anything bad has happened up until like by the time we see in the movie. She's 8 months pregnant. She could have gotten an abortion anytime. And there was, like, the world wasn't out of control.
Yeah.
For the first 3 months she was pregnant in the movie. It was fine, as far as we know. Okay. So in the movie, I don't know, you probably don't have an answer to this scene. I found this incredibly ambiguous and frustrating because I didn't know what was going on. So they're in the grocery store when they're getting supplies. Charlie, the guy who works at the grocery store, is there. They're by the loading dock door, and they hear a person out there saying, "Hey, let me in," or, help me. And he goes, "Hey, that's Fish Fingers," or whatever. Charlie's like, "I know that guy. He works at the store." Yeah, his name's Fish Fingers. And they're like, "Okay, we're going to let him in." So they all cover their eyes, and they open the door, and he starts yelling or something, or they realize that something's bad has happened.
Yeah.
And then Charlie sees the thing. I guess there's a thing out there, because Charlie his eyes do get... he gets, the look in his eyes like he's infected or whatever. But then he charges through the door and knocks Fish Fingers back out, and then they shut the door, and basically Charlie saves them by not letting this guy in who probably would have killed them all or whatever, or tried to. And in the movie, I couldn't tell if Charlie was killing himself by running out there, or if Charlie was saving them, because he gives like a yell, like a...
Yeah.
It seems like he seems in control when he goes running through the door. Like he was like, "Oh shit, I'm gonna help. I'm gonna save you guys." But also he was infected, so I wasn't sure.
This part isn't in the book.
Okay.
So I am of no help here, because I didn't really understand what we were supposed to think had happened either.
Okay.
Like it's a scary scene.
Yeah.
But
I assume, I don't know. It doesn't matter. Okay, it's not in the book, so we have no more answers. Okay, so this in the movie during the river scenes, at one point with these two kids, and the kids are probably like 4 years old or whatever, maybe 5 max, but they're, because it's like 5 years later, so yeah, they're like 5. These two kids are like 5, and at one point she's talking to them. She goes on a supply run and gets things happen after they lose. At one point, they lose their supplies in the boat, and she needs to go get more supplies. So she finds a building, and then she gets chased by a wind creature monster thing. And one of the girl ends up wandering away to like find her or whatever, and she pulls her back, and she's yelling at them both. "I told you to stay in the boat. If anything happens to me, you guys keep going and just look out for yourself." And this whole time I was like, how in the world are these two 5-year-olds? Do you expect these two 5-year-olds to, like, if you had died back there, these two 5-year-olds are now in a boat on the river. They're dead. They're not. They're.
I get where you're coming from, and I don't disagree. But I also felt like in the book they seemed much better prepared for the world that they live in.
Okay.
Like at one point she does pass out in the boat, and they like take up the rows and keep going. They take up the oars.
Yeah. Okay. In the movie, they just seem like they don't ever say anything. They don't ever do anything. They literally just walk around with blindfolds and do whatever Sandra Bullock tells them to.
I want to talk about that later, because I also had an issue with that. Surprise.
Because they're just, she's like, just save yourselves. I'm like, how could they possibly? We have seen no indication in this movie that these children have any sort of ability to like protect themselves or survive on their own. They literally don't ever say anything. They just walk around and do whatever you tell them to, mostly sleep in the bottom of a boat. And now I get that. I don't know. I just like, she's like, don't come try to find me. Just look after yourself. Maybe that's what you would say, regardless of whether or not you thought they could survive, because what other choice do they have? I don't know.
Yeah.
I was like, I just struck me as like, what, these kids from what we've seen would just be dead. Like they have no, I'm going to skip that one because it's not important. Unless you wanted to talk about it specifically.
Oh,
how long the flashback takes place.
Okay,
over.
No, I do want to actually talk about it for a second, because I had an issue with that too while I was watching the movie.
In the movie, so during the flashback to 5 years ago, before leading up to
while
her,
they're in the house,
I had such a hard time telling how long of a period they were in that house for. It's
basically impossible to tell how much time has passed from when they get to the house to when Gary murders everyone.
Yes.
Like, has it been months? Has it been weeks?
Exactly.
Has it been days? We don't know.
I had no idea if I was having such... It's so interesting because on the river, every time they cut back to the river, it's like 48 hours on the river.
Yeah.
Blah, 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 blah. Well, it would have been nice to have something like that.
Well, then the thing that really irritated me about this was that the book provided them with a really easy measurement system that would have worked super great in a visual medium, which is that when Mallory arrives at the house, she's only 2 months pregnant. Oh. So she's like barely showing. We could have just watched her get more pregnant.
Yeah. Yeah. And because see, in the movie, she's already 8 months pregnant or whatever. She's like a month away. And now ultimately, but see, because they do say at one point, she says, when are you due? Like when the other pregnant woman shows up, she's like, oh, when are you due? And they like say October 1st and September 31st or something like that. They're both due like at the beginning of October, but I didn't know where we were.
Right.
Like now, like when they say that, I'm like, but what is it now? Like I get, okay, so you're due. If they would have said I'm due in 6 weeks, would have been way easier instead of I'm due October 1st. I don't know what the date is currently, movie.
And I don't know, and I feel like the movie almost tried to be like, oh, well, we've run out of food, but like we don't know how much food was in the house to begin with, so that's not a good litmus test. No,
we have no idea how much food was there, and we don't know. I mean, there's a lot of people there. Odds are, I mean, it could have been 3 days before they had 15 people in that house. They could have eaten all the food there in a couple days. Like,
I don't know, man.
So I was like, I had a really hard time. Like, okay, how long have these people been together? How long have they known each other? How long have they been in this house? Has it been a week? Has it been 2 months? I really couldn't. I wasn't sure. I assumed it was. Now there may be a detail where you may be able to suss it out based on like. But I will preface I always remind our listeners that when we're watching these movies, we're taking notes and going back and forth between watching and notes and watching and notes. So occasionally we miss lines. There may have been a line where the doctor says like, you're 33 weeks along. Something. So we know that when she gives birth, it's been 3 weeks since, or whatever.
There could have been. Yeah.
That's very possible. But I missed it if that was the case, because I wasn't sure. Because, obviously...
Yeah, because if there was something like that, it's like one thing.
Yeah.
And then it becomes just impossible to suss out how long they've been in the house.
Yeah, especially because we're going back and forth between...
Yeah.
We jump back and forth from the river to the flashback, and every time we do, a lot of times they're like in different clothes and stuff. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, so is it the next day, or is it the next week? Or is it that night? Like, because sometimes it felt very clearly like, oh, this is just later that day. And then other times I was like, wait a second, when is this now? How long from the last time we saw these characters are we now? I don't know. I had a hard time with that. Finally.
We already talked about that.
Oh, yeah, we did talk about
running from the monsters.
Yeah. I don't know. I still don't understand why they felt like they needed to
run from the monsters. Well, you know what? I don't understand it either.
All right. Well, that's all I had for Lost in Adaptation. I'll have more. Let's get into your segments, or this is going to be 3 hours long. So, what do we got? Better in the book?
You like to read?
Oh, yes. I love to read.
What do you like to read?
Everything.
I mentioned that the way the reports of people killing themselves and killing each other were more sporadic, lower numbers. I thought that made more sense. Yeah. Given like their reactions to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Because in the movie they have like no reaction to tens of thousands of people.
It's much more of a
themselves.
slow burn.
Yeah.
In the book. Not that the heroine of a story like this can't be older, but Sandra Bullock is like much older.
Yes.
Like 30 years older than Mallory in the book.
Yeah.
Like I guess they never say, but it's kind of implied that she's like in her early 20s.
Yeah.
Like she's living with her sister and they're having a fun time.
Yeah. I think the thing that's toughest about that in regards to the movie is that she's pregnant.
Yeah,
and we all know Sandra Bullock is 54 years old.
Like, are we supposed to pretend that this pregnancy wouldn't be really hella dangerous?
Yeah.
Because it would be.
And I mean, yeah, I like I said, I was like, yeah, I have no problem. I mean, and it's it's sort of been a problem the opposite in movies for a long time and in Hollywood that basically, once you're over 30, you basically only play like old women or whatever. So I get that. But at the same time, it's like Sandra Bullock, everybody, if it was a lesser known actress or something, but everybody knows Sandra Bullock is 54 years old and seeing her pregnant is like, or, everybody knows Sandra Bullock is over 50 years old and you shouldn't get pregnant when you're over 50 years old. It's like really not a good idea.
I mean, it can,
and not even
it can
possible.
Be done, but
yeah.
But you would need a doctor.
Yeah.
And your delivery would be really dangerous and difficult.
Yeah.
And boy, they glossed over that.
Oh, they were just like, fine.
And they're out.
She went once and then that baby shot right out and she was fine.
But I also just felt like a lot of Mallory's like reactions and choices and just makes more sense for a younger person. Like somebody who doesn't have the benefit of experience.
Yeah. I don't know. I had no problem with her being older from the story they told. I thought it worked other than depending on how old she was supposed to be, being pregnant was like a little weird. But.
I mean, that is the major sticking point.
Yeah.
Is that, and had they addressed it, had they addressed that, this is going to be a difficult delivery or whatever, that might have saved it, but they didn't.
Not at all. They're like, it's fine.
I get what they were going for, but I liked the way that her sister died in the book better. I thought it was more horrific and like a subtle chilling kind of a way.
You said she just goes upstairs?
She goes upstairs and then Mallory hears a thump and she's like, "You all right up there?" And then she goes upstairs and Jess/Shannon has basically like thrown herself on a pair of scissors and is like just dead and blood gushing everywhere in the middle of the room. So
wow.
And then Mallory's like, "Okay, I have to leave."
Yeah. I have to leave.
I have to go now.
Okay.
Because they've been barricaded in their house.
Oh.
But then she's like, "Well, I don't want to stay here.
Yeah, right. I want to stay here, yeah.
I'm going to go try to
leave.
find this safe house that I've heard about."
Right. That makes sense.
The movie kind of like dives right into the action, which I get.
Yeah, they gotta keep
I
it
felt
2 hours.
I was interested to see if you were able to follow everything that was happening because it felt really chaotic to me.
I had no problem following it. I mean, the shit hit the fan, and then she ends up in a house. Like there was nothing really to follow. It was just like, and I mean, part of that is because I've sort of absorbed the general premise from the internet, that these creatures, you see them, you kill yourself. I thought the movie did a fine job of setting that up and explaining it. And the beginning of this movie, the first 30 minutes of this movie were the best part of it, I thought, or the first 45 minutes or whatever were like the best part of it, I thought.
So the kids in the movie, you're right, they are kind of just lumps.
Yeah.
And they sit there and do whatever Sandra Bullock says.
Yeah.
They actually have roles in the book other than just being lumps.
Yeah.
And I actually could not stand the way that the movie treated them. Like, they weren't just these dumb kids in the book. They are little kids, but like Mallory has prepared them for this world to the very best of her abilities. And like when she passes out in the boat, they know what to do.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Because that was a thought I had watching the movie. I was like, it is an interesting idea or an interesting thing to sort of trying to survive an apocalypse with 2 5-year-olds who are so young that they barely, or 4 or 5, however old they're supposed to be, that they barely understand. Like there's that scene at the beginning where that we see when they're getting ready to go down the river, and I thought this was at least interesting in the movie. It was an interesting idea, and now it's completely different from the book because in the book she sort of prepared them for all of this. In the movie, it doesn't seem that way as much, and she basically, I thought, trying to get two really young kids to understand the danger of what's going on, to where she has the line in the movie where she's like, if you don't do exactly what I say, you will die. If you try to take your blindfold off, I will hurt you. And I was like, that's a really, how I was trying to put myself in her shoes, and like, how do you try to explain to two stupid little kids the severity of the situation? Mm-hmm. And I thought, and now in the book, it's slowly, we see it over a longer period of time, I guess. And sort of, we see her over the 5 years she raises them, or maybe you don't see it, but we see realize that
bits and pieces of it. And we learn a lot about how she has basically like trained them to potentially be able to survive in a world where they can't look at what's around them.
Yeah. And we get a little bit of that in the movie where they're like using the rocks to like hear and like do like echolocation kind of thing. And we get a little bit of that, but then all we ever see the kids do in the movie is just sit in a boat blindfolded and like look around. Yeah. And listen to things. We never ever see them do anything. Even like the little girl at one point just wanders off with the rope and then it's just walking around.
Yeah. But
that was like, what do we do? Okay. But I thought that whole idea was an interesting idea. I don't think the movie
it's an interesting idea, but I don't think that the movie did it justice.
Okay.
I hate everything about the way the movie portrayed the creatures. I don't like that they gave them visual cues, and I understand why they did, but I don't like it. I also really disliked how they added this like quasi-spiritual element where people like see and hear their dead loved ones. Yeah. I thought that was weird.
Yeah, that was very strange.
And the creatures to me in the movie seemed more like openly antagonistic.
Yeah.
Especially at the end, it felt like we were supposed to understand that they were like pursuing them through the woods.
That's not
at all the case in the book. Like a big part of the creeping dread in the book is that if you go outside, these things could literally be standing all around you and you would have no idea.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I get that. And I think that would have been more interesting. And so, because we talked about in the prequel that they designed these creatures and realized we were going to see them in the movie at some point, but they realized it just looked stupid. So they didn't do it. I think what would have been more interesting, because what they went with in the movie is they go with like this, the leaves kind of raised up, and it gives them a very, they seem like ghosts or something.
Yeah.
Whereas I thought it would have been more interesting for them to be a physical thing that doesn't like fly around and like, because they seem to like fly around, at least that's kind of the implication you get when, and I guess that's what's tough about the movie is they're trying to figure out how to portray this idea of this thing that if you see it, it drives you crazy, but we don't ever see them in the movie because again, it would kind of ruin it, and it would be tough to make them look good and make it not seem cheesy and bad.
Whatever they came up with would not measure up to what people imagined. So
so I get what they're going for, but the way the movie does it, I didn't find it as scary as I think it could have been.
I totally agree.
Like the whole like leaves blowing around and thing, because a part of it reminded me of The Happening with like the wind coming after you to kill you, and it's like, all right,
like to me, it would have been scarier had they they're in the woods and you hear like a twig snap. Off to the side, and then the character swings around and there's nothing there or whatever. Like to me, that type of thing would have been scarier.
I think what actually even would have been scarier is if you do the thing where instead of like the leaves blowing around and stuff, the only time we do occasionally kind of see the creatures. It would have been interesting. We never see them fully. So you don't have to design the whole thing, but like when they're around them and we're seeing like the character standing in the woods or whatever, if there's one near them, you might see just behind a tree, like a vague shadowy thing. Not
like the first half of Signs.
Yes, kind of like the first half of Signs, where you never actually see like the alien or whatever. You don't see it, but you see like a bit of it, and you can never tell what it is or what it looks like or what the even form of it is. But you
see something move,
you see a
shadow.
Yes, exactly, and that sort of thing. So that it could be a physical thing, it could be a ghost. It could be, it could be whatever, and your brain can still make that up. But you're actually seeing something. Instead of like the leaves blowing, and then it just looks like wind.
Another thing they could have done, and I'm astonished that this didn't make it into the movie, because this seems like a cheap way for the movie to get an emotional beat. There's a dog in the book.
Oh, yeah.
And they could have done, there are actually several instances in the book where the dog is like barking at the doors and windows. Yeah. And it's really unnerving because you don't know what he's barking at.
Yeah. Yeah, that would have been creepy. Anyways, I continue.
Okay. We talked about the whole thing where Mallory like gaslights the little girl into making her think she's gonna have to look. Yeah. Hated that. Tom surviving the onslaught of Gary, I think, is interesting, but it also kind of ruins Mallory's like badass character growth. Like, she raises those two kids by herself. In the fucking apocalypse. Yeah. And like, not all of her methods are great, but goddamn, all three of them make it to the end.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Because, she spends the whole time. I think they liked the idea of giving her that relationship and having somebody there with her. But I do think it's a more cold and like interesting story if she's by herself raising those kids. Yeah. Like you said.
Yeah. A couple things that were in the book that didn't make it into the movie. I mentioned the dog. There's a border collie named Victor. I'm generally okay with missing out on this, but there is a scene where Victor falls to the creatures and like tears himself apart. Which could have been really emotionally impactful.
Well, would have been awful.
But awful.
Yeah.
Like, I'm generally okay with that not making it, but I'm astonished that they didn't use that.
Yeah.
There's also a part where they get attacked by wolves while they're in the boat.
That would have been nuts.
Yeah. And then there's also, while they're in the boat, they hear this cacophony of birds above their heads, and they're like, what the fuck is going on? Yeah. And then dead birds start raining down on them because the birds have like started murdering each other in the skies.
So the birds can also...
Yeah, so we come to find out that animals can be affected by this. Yeah.
Because that in the movie, that's never...
No, it's never
we never
really
see,
touched on.
I mean, we don't know it could, but we never ever see an instance of it happening or not happening. So, okay.
Okay. So, I want to talk about the gangs of people roving around.
Trying to find people who haven't been exposed and exposing them.
I think this is really problematic. Okay. So, I saw Dan Crocker, who has a podcast called Sanesplaining, posted about this. And I hadn't read the book or seen the movie yet, and I was like, okay, I'm going to keep an eye out for that. Okay. That he felt that the way that the movie portrayed the mentally ill was pretty not so great.
Do we see anybody who's actually mentally ill in the movie?
So there's one line where we get the indication that these like kind of people who rove around, Gary says that they're psychos escaped from the psych ward.
Yes, he does say that.
So I think it's just kind of gross.
See, okay, I agree. I didn't think that was true. I thought Gary was lying. And I agree if that is what it's supposed to be, and that these are escapees from the psych ward or whatever. Yes, that is very problematic. To have them be this kind of roaming band of it, but that was not what I took it as. I thought, especially once we realized Gary is quote unquote infected in the world of the movie. I'm sort of just going on the rules set up in the movie here. once we realize Gary is in fact infected and is there to, or if he is or isn't, I don't know. Because again, his eyes look normal when he first gets into the house, but eventually they're not, and he is quote unquote infected. And then he starts, killing everybody in the house. I was under the impression that he was lying or making something up about making up a story basically to cover his, just like to make them feel for him. He's like, oh, these psychos got out and they were making us look at the monsters and I just barely got away. But that's not what happened. And that actually these are just people who have seen the creatures and are.
And I think yes. Okay,
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And I think it gets more complicated. 'Cause to me, we have almost here, I feel like a failing of language.
Yeah.
Where
that's true.
and the book broaches on this idea too. We have a point where a character wonders about whether people who are already struggling with mental health issues would be affected differently by the creatures, but that never really goes anywhere.
That does happen in the book or in the movie now, doesn't it?
Doesn't it?
I thought there was a line about something along the lines of maybe it was Gary said something along those lines, like that people who were already, and maybe that is the implication, is that people who were like in the mental hospital, when they saw the creatures, they didn't kill themselves. They like turned into this like the like I call them like evangelists for the creatures, where they go around and try to get more people to look at the creatures. So maybe that is the implication. I don't know. And
like I said, I mean, to me in the book, it does come off more as like a failing of language.
Yeah.
Like this is making people suddenly become horrifically violent. We don't have a good word for it. So we're using words like crazy or like insane. But there's not this plot line about like gangs of violent, criminally insane people. Like to me, that's some Gotham shit and it doesn't fit in this story at all.
Yeah.
And it's hella problematic. And I don't know. And I feel like there's this obsession too in like post-apocalyptic media to be like, oh, people are the real enemy.
Oh yeah. That's
and
always
like, I'm sorry, but The Walking Dead killed that trope to death. It's done. We don't need to explore it anymore.
Yeah.
And especially not in a offensive way.
Yeah.
I don't know, man.
That's interesting.
I just thought that like they took something that was briefly mentioned in the book and like took it to this place of like, ugh.
Yeah, that wasn't how I read it. Again, I didn't read them as, oh, these people are quote unquote like clinically like diagnosable, and that's why they're going around doing this. I took it as they're quote unquote infected by, again, the creatures or whatever, and so and it was just what I assumed, because again the rules are kind of muddy.
Right.
I assumed that somehow these people were like, some people in this world, when they see the creature for some reason, don't just kill themselves. They like retain enough of their, they don't kill themselves. They somehow become infected and they become like carriers going around like it's sort of like a virus type of thing, where some of the things that get infected by the virus die. Other ones become sort of carriers and spreaders of the virus. Mm-hmm. And they're spreading by going around and finding people that aren't infected and trying to infect them. Kind of like a parasite or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like they it doesn't kill them, the host, but it like is in them. But it's muddy because we don't know what it is. We don't know what the creatures are. We don't know if it is some sort of weird viral infection or if it's just magic. You know what I mean? Like, is it some like ghost entity demon thing that are like, who knows? We don't know, and that's fine. We don't have to know. But since we don't know, I wasn't sure. Again, that's why I was asking those questions about like, does some people not, when they get infected, they don't just kill themselves, they like run around and try to get other people to see it. It's
and the like
it's confusing.
And that brings me back to the issue of like the movie trying to build rules in here just doesn't work, because it's the ambiguity of the book that makes it work. I think. Yeah, is the fact that like nobody really knows anything.
Right.
All right, well, we want to talk better in the movie.
Yeah, better
then.
movie. Let's get to that short list.
My life has taught me one lesson, Hugo, and not the one I thought it would. Happy endings only happen in the movies.
Yeah.
Probably.
Okay. So the scene where she's in the car with her sister, I thought was tense and effectively done.
Yeah.
Up to a point. Then I just thought it got like chaotic and hard to follow. But that was me, I guess. I liked that they added a moment where Mallory kind of freaks out about her sister having committed suicide.
Yeah.
Because we don't really get a moment of that in the book.
Yeah.
I think she just kind of like pushes things down.
Right.
I liked that the movie added diversity. Everybody in the book was white, so
Yeah. Yeah. And it makes sense because they're in like a
they're
somewhere
in
in
California.
like,
they're in a
sort of a more
diversely
diverse,
populated area.
kind of outside the city. I assume they're like outside, say Sacramento or something like that.
Something like that, yeah. I liked where they tried to drive in the car with the GPS.
Yeah.
I thought it was kind of an interesting way around, whereas in the book they just like drive blind occasionally and like hit whatever, which I don't know that would work out.
No, he would not.
But at least the GPS and like the collision sensors make a little bit of sense.
Yeah.
I also thought the scene in the grocery stores was pretty good.
Yeah.
I loved the line, "Where's the booze?" That's me in the apocalypse. Olympia being the one who lets Gary into the house. That's not how it goes down in the book, but I thought that made a lot of sense.
Yeah, because she was let in earlier in the movie.
Changing Gary's stuff from notes. In the book, he comes with like a notebook of like all of these ramblings, but changing it to drawings, I think makes sense for the shift to a visual medium.
Yeah.
That's what I have for better in the movie.
All right, fair enough. I agree with all those. And I did like when Gary shows up and pulls all the drawings out and they're like all these terrifying. I assume that basically what that was when they were trying to come up with creature designs. That was just all of their previs.
That was
like,
just their storyboarding.
Yeah, that was just like, well, we got these 50 different drawings for what the creatures could look like. We'll just have him have those, and then we'll.
I do have one. The movie nailed it.
As I expected, practically perfect in every way.
I thought the movie kind of nailed Olympia.
Like
her
the other
character,
pregnant
she was kind
woman.
of like weepy and ineffectual and kind of
like
infuriating.
basic and annoying.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like Sandra Bullock is just like, God, I don't want to be friends with you.
Yeah, so they got her right.
Yeah. There you go. Good job, movie. I will add to the movie nailed it that they nailed the fact that little girl looks exactly like her mother.
Yes, she does.
That little girl looks exactly like that actress who plays her mother, to the point where I had to Google and see if it was in fact her daughter.
Yeah.
And it's not. It didn't, or at least they had different names and stuff. I assumed they weren't. But holy shit, that little girl looked just like her.
Mm-hmm.
Like the face.
No, like
terrified.
scarily so.
Yeah. And to be fair, Sandra Bullock's kid kind of looks like her a little bit too, but not like that little girl. All right, general notes, and then we'll get into the final verdict.
A lot of what I have in my general notes here is also
Yeah.
I am a little disappointed that when both women go into labor, no one was yelling boil water.
Yeah.
Because I feel like that's a movie staple. Like, you boil water when someone's having a baby. That's just what you do.
Yeah. Oh yeah, boil water and you get linens.
Yeah.
You get,
Boiled water and linens.
yep. It's apparently the only thing you need. I thought it was an interesting idea to do a Sophie's Choice where one of the kids isn't your kid. Was like an interesting idea when they're kind of setting that up on the river, where she's like, thinking that she's gonna eat they're setting up the idea that one of the kids is gonna have to look so that she can steer the boat. So it's basically Sophie's Choice, but one of those kids is not your fucking kid. So that was an interesting setup, and then it just doesn't really pay off so much.
Yeah, they don't really take it anywhere.
Because I really did think that she was going to look, and that would have made sense, and that sort of cements her journey into motherhood and a sort of accepting this other child as hers.
And I thought
and
that
being willing to sacrifice herself. Now, that also was potentially a little problematic. But anyways,
But I think that would have been more effective than what they did,
Yeah.
where they have him just like stumbling around in the woods, and
Yeah.
then she's like apologizing to the little girl.
Yeah, the little
which they
girl
don't
just
ever
shows up.
leave the boat in the book. So
what do you mean they don't ever leave the boat?
like they don't ever like leave the boat and come out.
Oh, right,
and,
'cause
like,
the-
wander around the forest
Because the school's on the river,
Yeah.
you said, and they basically
Yeah.
just get right out of the boat
Yeah.
into the school or whatever. Yeah. Yeah, they have to wander around in the woods in the movie for a few minutes, and then the little girl's like gonna take her blindfold off, but Sandra Bullock talks her into not doing it. Oh, when she's on the radio, speaking of Walking Dead, we both thought this would have been hilarious. Where they're on the radio, and the guy on the radio who's basically explaining about this compound's name is Rick.
Yeah.
And I was gonna like, how fucking great would it be if she gets to the compound, it's just Rick Grimes. It's just there.
I would have shat myself on the spot. I mean, there's no way that wouldn't have been spoiled for us
Yeah.
by the internet,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, it was
that
just
would have
Rick
been
Grimes
amazing.
somehow, like in an alternate timeline. I don't even know how it would make sense. It wouldn't.
They're
But
building a cinematic universe.
yeah, well, because I think now we stopped watching The Walking Dead, but so he's not on the show anymore.
Yeah.
But from what I have heard is that he survived, and basically like he didn't die.
Does he just wander into the sunset?
No, there's like an explosion. He ends up on a helicopter, like
What?
being taken to some compound or something, and everybody thinks he's dead, but he actually survived. And I think
Boy,
they did
that
that.
show went off the rails.
It got wild, apparently. Like I said, we haven't watched it in several seasons, but so apparently, and it's spoilers for Walking Dead, but if you haven't watched it, that was like 2 seasons ago or whatever, or last season. But yeah, apparently, so he's alive. So the compound he could have gotten taken to
could have been the
could
school
have been
for the,
the
blind.
one from Bird Box. It would have been perfect.
What a crossover that would have been.
A great crossover.
Okay, yeah, my last note literally says I fucking stopped taking notes because this is also different.
Yeah.
So
My biggest problem with the movie was the rules. I had such a problem
Yeah.
figuring out what the rules of these things were, the creatures, and what, sometimes all of a sudden now they can talk to our characters and whisper and make them hear things and do things, or, kind of like try to influence them to do things where that has never been a thing up until this point. You know what I mean? Like, where did that come from? And then the running from them, and I was just like, I don't understand what, And then the fact that every time they get inside any building, they're just like, oh, we're safe. Take
Yeah.
our blindfold off. I'm like, why would you assume that that's the case? All right, fine. Like, those are my biggest problems. I thought overall a lot of the filmmaking was pretty effective, but I had plot issues that just really like nagged at me throughout the course of the movie. Also, this movie very much felt like a movie about parenthood written by a dude who's not a parent.
yeah, I don't know if Josh Mallerman
He's
has
not.
kids.
I looked it up. Well, I don't think he has
But,
kids. It didn't look like it. And now that may not be quite as much of the theme
Yeah,
as the
that's
book.
not really a.
Or I mean,
not
it's definitely
so much.
somewhat, but in this movie, it very much felt like about sort of accepting and sort of growing into being a parent and that sort of thing. And I was like, it was interesting because he doesn't have kids. Like, what a
Yeah.
weird theme to write. Now, maybe the screenwriter who adapted it thought does or something, and thought, and the director or whatever, during the adaptation process, that was sort of one of the things they sort of latched onto. And again, it's really only a theme in like the last half, because for the first half they don't have, there's
Right.
no kids around, but it is sort of dealing with being pregnant and all that sort of stuff. And then, her not wanting to have a kid, but kind of thinking about giving up for adoption, ultimately accepting the kid. It was interesting ideas there. It just never really effectively got to me in any way that it didn't emotionally land with me very much. There were some good scenes. But anyways, let's get to your final verdict.
Now, are you ready for your sentence?
Sentence? But there must be a verdict first.
Sentence first, verdict afterward.
The book.
Yeah.
It's the book. To me, this movie was just very messy.
Yeah.
It was like if the screenwriters had a pizza, but instead of being happy that they had a pizza and maybe like adding extra cheese to it, they were like, oh, this pizza? We're going to grind it up and pretend it's pasta because fuck you. The thing that drives me nuts is that they could have adapted this book verbatim and had a great subtle horror film.
Yeah.
But they didn't do that.
Yeah.
The book's horror to me is so creeping and so subtle. And part of it, like I said, is that the characters, and by extension, you, don't know the rules.
Yeah.
Like, we don't know anything about the creatures. We don't know how they work. We don't know what they're doing. And it creates this really, like, claustrophobic, suffocating sense of blindness.
Yeah.
Themes.
Yeah.
And I, like we said over and over, the movie tried to add rules to that. And it became, I think, really obvious that they just didn't know how to do it.
Yeah. And they don't stay consistent. And I think another thing is that the movie thought it needed more action-y beats. And there's not action in this movie, but, you know, there's scenes of her running around from these things and, like, shooting guns and stuff at them. And it just felt wrong. Like, it just felt silly.
Yeah.
And I think you're right that had they not fallen into the trap of, like, we need it to be a little more, we need more, like, action. Again, not action, but, like, more drama and, like, and then they're going to wander around in the woods, like, hearing voices and finding each other. And it's like, it doesn't quite, it never succeeds in being as creepy as it thinks it is.
Yeah.
I think. And whereas if they had been more subtle, it would have.
Yeah.
I think they went a little too over the top trying to make it, like, interesting, maybe, or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree with that. Like I said, the book is pretty subtle in its horror, and I think you're right. I think the movie fell into this trap of thinking that it needed to be a horror movie.
Yeah, whereas it shouldn't have tried to be a horror movie, and it shouldn't have tried to make the rules. It should have left it vague.
Yes.
Whereas it makes rules and then doesn't do a good, like, doesn't...
Right. It doesn't... it doesn't follow through with them. And on top of that, we have this, like, lazy humans are the real enemy message driven by, like, lazy, offensive stereotyping. And so, yeah.
Well, there you go. The book's better. Go read the book. Even though the movie's on Netflix and easy to watch, the book is better. That's it for the 40th episode?
Yes.
Of This Film Is Lit. As always, you can follow us on all of the social media. We would really appreciate it. Also, you can rate and review us on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you download our fine podcast and listen to us. Katie, what's next?
Next?
I know what it is. I can just say it. It's Minority Report.
It is Minority Report. You're right.
So yeah, our next episode is Minority Report. If all goes to plan, we'll have a guest, a guest host, Mr. Aaron Rabi from the podcast, several podcasts. One of the ones that the reason I asked him to come be on the show is that he hosts a podcast called Philosophers in Space that is a sci-fi discussion podcast. He teaches, believe Aaron teaches moral theory or something like that. Gosh, now I'm blowing it. Anyways, he's a philosophy guy. He knows a lot about philosophy. On his podcast, Philosophers in Space, they talk about different sci-fi projects, different sci-fi shows, movies, books, and discuss different philosophical elements within them. And one of the episodes they have done previously was Minority Report. And I said, hey, you want to come on and talk about sort of the adaptation and that sort of thing and bring up some of the philosophy elements? He goes, yeah. So that is the plan. He won't be on the prequel episode, but he will be on the main episode in 2 weeks. So look out for that. In the meantime, check out his podcast. He has two of them. Like I said, Philosophers in Space and Embrace the Void is his other one, which is they talk about all kinds of stuff. They actually just had an episode come out where they talked about Bird Box. So on Embrace the Void, they talked about Bird Box and A Quiet Place and kind of... I haven't listened to it because I didn't want to spoil things, so I haven't listened to that one yet. But those are his two podcasts. Go check them out. I'm really a big fan of both of them. And like I said, assuming everything goes to plan, we have this recording scheduled and set up. He should be on our Minority Report episode. So that will be exciting. We have our prequel episode next week, which we don't know what we're talking about for that yet.
We're talking about tech noir.
There we go. We're talking about tech noir. That's what we're going to learn about in the prequel. So until then... guys, gals, non-binary, and everybody else.
Keep reading books.
Keep watching movies. And keep being awesome.